What's happening? You got the Retro Gaming Hippie here, and today I'm bringing you a review from a game that I've never ever played before in my life. It's a role-playing game, which I absolutely love. If you've seen some of my reviews in the past, I absolutely adore the Commodore 64 Gold Box D&D games that I played very much as a young man. What I never ever played as a young man, because we didn't really have it, and I really didn't care to play video games at this point in my life, was the Nintendo. So one of these games that was replaced on the Nintendo that is well known to be one of the probably beginnings of a great franchise is, of course, Final Fantasy. I'd never played this game before until recently. I fired it up and decided to play it all the way through. I never had it as a kid. By about this time, which was 1988, 1990, I was kind of phasing myself out of video games at that moment. It is right around the same time that Champions of Krym, which I reviewed before, Secret of the Silver Blades, they were both coming out on Commodore 64 amongst other games later on, but this came out on Nintendo. I never had a Nintendo growing up, so I never had played it. I had played Final Fantasy 7, 8, 10, or 12. I had played them on the PlayStation 1 or 2, and I really, really enjoyed those games, enjoyed the series. But back at this particular time, I never played any kind of role-playing games, and I certainly didn't own a Nintendo. So we're going to fire this up, and I'm going to give you my opinions on what the game is like. Before we fire it up and I show you what it looks like on my meager production, I want to let you know that today's game is sponsored by Pac-Man, Waka Waka, and a little bit of a Black Velvet from Canada. One of my dad's favorite drinks, so my father, who's no longer around, this is to you. So before I actually show it, I'm going to get into some things I didn't really care for in the game. One of them is you had kind of a limited number on spells you had as you kind of progress. It was kind of set up in some formats, like I remember from the D&D games. As you level up, you got more spells in certain levels, and it opened up more areas to buy this particular spells for the level you were at. However, what it did lack, in my opinion, in that regards, was a way to refresh those spells by maybe resting and memorizing as you went along. I think you actually had to go back or use a cabin or use an item to fully rest or heal the people. That was kind of a little bit mediocre in terms of difficulty in comparison to the old D&D games, where you could just try to rest and memorize and select the spells that you had bought or found scrolls for as you went along. So that was kind of a minor deterrence. They didn't have a way to really fully resurrect folks if they died, other than the limited number of spells that a healer might have to bring them back to life, such as resurrect. You would run across that in the D&D games as well, so that was kind of minor in comparison to this. One of the big things I'm sure a lot of people didn't like about this game when it came out was the ineffective attack. So what that means is when things synced up and you decided to fight each other, you selected what your party was going to do. Well, you might select everybody to fight one big, strong guy in a party of 5 because you knew you had to take him out. Well, if you accomplished that attack in 4 attacks, let's say, and got rid of them, the last attack, that if it targeted them, would be labeled as ineffective because the target was no longer there. Well, that was kind of a lame thing to have. Is like, why not just have your characters move on to another enemy that was still there, or give you the option to choose somebody else instead of just being a wasted attack. But, you know, we all starting to go learn and go along, and I get that. Another thing that was really, really kind of hard to kind of follow along, other than using a game guide from online, which I did, was a way to map out dungeons without just kind of exploring and going from there. There were nothing that I saw that labeled floor levels, labeled coordinates, things that you saw in the D&D games. Now, why was this important? Because when we played those D&D games back there, you know what we used to do to figure out dungeons? We grab pieces of graph paper and we would map out the dungeons based on coordinates, and we could kind of show where things were inside the game, whether it be a treasure, a door, it went nowhere. It didn't really matter. We could map out what we were doing, and then we could take these maps, actually, if we were playing the role-playing D&D game back in the day with our friends, we could set up an actual campaign kind of based on that map. So that's one of the really cool things I love about the old Gold Box games that I just didn't feel with this more modern setting. What did we get that was better? Well, one more thing I should say that I didn't care for before I go back to the better things, and that was character creation. The old D&D Gold Box games, however limited, you could mold your characters by developing their look very minorly, but most importantly, their name. I could actually give a name to my characters, and you kind of see that in my party in the D&D games because I love wrestling. They're all Vince McMahon, Miss Elizabeth, Macho Man Randy Savage, Ultimate Warrior. They're all characters that I invested in. This particular game gave you, I think it was 4 characters to change the name of your character. So I definitely just labeled them out as AA, BB, CC, DD. It really didn't matter, or I should have kept them to the original name that they were given. You also couldn't adjust what they looked like, although when they developed a class later on, they did look different as you went along, and that was kind of cool. But overall, I really didn't have an attachment to the characters and what they look like. Now, one thing I really didn't follow with the more modern games and even D&D back then was storyline. So I can't really credit to what the storyline really follows along with and how captivating that is to make you want to play. The only game with storyline that I really followed in modern role-playing games was Kuldeka, which I think I talked about in my review of Kuldeka a while back. That actually kind of followed the storyline. I kind of really definitely dug it. But this particular game, I really didn't pay attention. I was just kind of mortaring through, following the online guide, and giving it a go. It definitely has better, different graphics than the old D&D games. I'll give it that. Music-wise, it definitely has better sound and music because the old D&D games are not known for their constant music or sound as they go through. The music that you do get in certain points, mostly the select screen and maybe some of the ending screens, is pretty good. But overall, it's not a big highlight of the D&D Gold Box games. So, with that being said, let's fire it up. Let's see where I'm at, and let me give you a little show of the game. Today, of course, we're going to be using the old Dogbone controller and the old top loader Nintendo system, which if you're going to buy a Nintendo, in my opinion, I would upgrade to whatever cost it is for the top loader. I don't think you're going to have any issues with it. It's extremely compact. It's a wonderful little system. And most of all, if you get a Dogbone controller, if you're going to play games for a long time, this does not hurt your hands the way the old boxy Nintendo game did. So with that being said, let me show you what it looks like on my crappy setup, and we'll give you a little bit of a showcase of what the original Final Fantasy looked like. I did like how that you had these machines like this, being the airship, that you could really travel around anywhere you wanted to go. The overall screen looks better than the old D&D games with texture and graphics, but the music is kind of repetitive, and generally I would just turn it down anyway. So what does combat look like? Well, it's turn-based, of course, and here I have a chance to strike first. Choose a guy to fight, or I can choose magic, choose to run. Now, you did have different characters you could bring in and out. That kind of brings to the replay value of the game, I suppose. And a lot about how the game progresses is probably depending on how you make up your team. I went with more of a mixture of magic users and fighters. I think that the game online guide suggested. So, it kind of worked out okay. It took me a little while to figure out, I don't know why, because I had a guy that was a black belt karate master, to take away his weapons and make him fight unarmed because he does a whole bunch more damage that way. Now, as you can see, the music seems a bit repetitive to me, and basically I would turn it down or off. The only thing I did kind of notice, when I do win the victory, I certainly recognize this tune from when I played later games. So that's all I'm really going to show you to the game. I don't think there's much more to show beyond that as far as graphics and how it sounds. And I'm going to wrap up this review and give you my final thoughts on it. It certainly is an iconic game and an iconic series. It's not something I'm personally going to keep in my collection. I think I will now pass this on to more of a Nintendo collector. Because for me, Gold Box D&D games have a much more value to me from being a childhood game that I played. So I really didn't care for it that much. I thought it was mediocre at best, and it was very difficult to navigate a lot of the dungeons. If I didn't have the online guide, I could certainly see where somebody would be pulling out their hair, trying to figure out where to go or how to go without having a way to track dungeon levels, whether they be floors, east, west, or numbers, the way D&D games did. So not a bad game, but not the best game in my opinion, and certainly going to move on for this collection. So there you have it. I'm the Retro Gaming Hippie, giving you the view of my Nintendo system that I don't really show up very often. And remember, I don't buy nostalgia because I am nostalgia.